Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming here today. What we wanted to talk about is last week we held our press conference outlining some of our caucus proposals dealing with the tax relief we want to provide people, as well as focusing on government transparency. And we alluded to some of these topics and what has transpired over the last month. And we wanted to hold this press conference today to make very clear what we are looking for. As we all know, there has been a lot of questions surrounding our school construction projects. To the tune of about $1 billion, the federal government is investigating how contracts were given out and steered possibly to certain corporations and individuals. And questions are rising over who profited from that. And we know that there is a criminal investigation now pending. What we also know is that we're hearing crickets from the other side of the aisle of how the legislature is going to step up and what responsibility we have to uncover and untangle and prevent this corruption from occurring in government. You know, under our statutes 2-46, the legislature has the authority to investigate any of our agencies, and we are calling for a bipartisan commission to be formed. I think it's been done in the past. I would suggest we have 2 members of each caucus come together and form a committee that would have the power to investigate these wrongdoings. And, you know, specifically, one of the things that we found troubling in this whole thing from a legislative standpoint is that what gave rise for school construction being moved into the Office of Policy and Management, a partisan governmental office, was done through a memorandum of understanding process, where essentially we circumvented, or the governor circumvented state statute, and the DAS commissioner delegated all of its authority over school construction, along with his staff, to the Secretary of OPM. We also understand that there are many, many, many other memorandums of understanding throughout government that has been entered into. Our office has requested every single one of them, and so far we've gotten about a dozen. But we believe that this commission needs to look into all of these memorandums, which in my opinion are being used to circumvent good government and the transparency of process. You know, it's not lost on me, about a month ago when we were honoring and reflecting on January 6th and what had happened at our Capitol. And many of our Democrat leaders stood up and questioned what Republicans had to say and whether they stand up with Trump and with his efforts to continue what they called the big lie. And I think what was said by the Democrat leaders, that they're going to ask Republicans, and I quote, "We will ask you that question publicly on social media many, many times." And so we are here to say that Republicans are going to be asking Democrats throughout the entire committee process and session many, many times, do you stand with corruption, or do you stand with good government? And the Republicans are here to say that we stand with good government, we stand with transparency, and we want this investigation to begin tomorrow. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Who would do this investigation? Who would staff it?
We could have a committee, as I suggested, a committee of 8, 2 people from each caucus, and
I'll make this investigative, and when you eliminated, using the legislature, eliminated the program review and investigation committee, so you don't have, to my knowledge, staff that is equipped to do it. When the legislature did the impeachment inquiry rolling, it spent $5 million on outside investigators to do so.
right. So we potentially have billions of dollars that might have been misappropriated through the executive branch. I think the legislature could find $5 million to start this investigation, and I think it's imperative. You know, as we hear from our colleagues, we're awash with money. There is ARPA money that has been set aside, and I think that there are resources within this building that could certainly help staff and conduct this investigation.
So you mentioned this
Yeah, I think it's imperative that we put financial resources into this effort. And whether it be using private investigators or using our staff and committee process that currently exists to fund this, we would support that.
There's already a federal investigation. Why do we need them?
Because this isn't about the criminal charges that they're going to be investigating. That's an ongoing process. This is specifically about the legislative and executive branch process. These memorandum of understanding and how the executive branch has circumvented the budget and state statute by using these memorandums. I think that we need to look at the entire scope of this process and say, how did we get here? The school construction scandal is certainly one issue, but more broadly, how did we get here and how can we prevent this from happening ever again?
Some will see this as political. Mayor Aaron Stewart has already been on social media saying that we're using an election year to gain support.
There is naturally always political components to this, and I think it's why I ended my statements the way I did. The Democrats are very quick to constantly use Trump as a litmus test for Republicans running for office. And I'm here to say that we will use corruption as our litmus test.
When was there last time there was a committee inquiry into any official in the building?
So I know under Governor Rowland there was an inquiry, and there was an inquiry with Senator DeLuca, and I think that was in 2009, 2007. That's right, 2007.
Would this be similar to that? I remember the select committee inquiry on roles that was set up in the Capitol and have those bipartisan.
That's right. It certainly could be similar. You know, I think those focused on impeachment proceedings. While we're not going that far yet, we would at least like to look at the structure of what went on and determine how we could prevent it from happening in the future.
What will be the parameters of this investigation? Are they going to look into GAS, OPM, where are the boundaries?
So, I mean, certainly I would suggest that we need to look at the school construction bidding process, especially as it dealt with demolition. Also look at our no bid process to make sure that while we understand there is an expediency to no bid contracts, there needs to be proper guardrails and safeguards put in place. And then I would also suggest that we look at the memorandums of understanding and how those are entered into. And then finally, what's not talked about is our state peer and what is going on with our quasi-public agencies and how are those contracts awarded.
What is it? Do you think the Democrats will cooperate, and what does it mean if they don't?
Well, I would hope they would cooperate. It's a little bit difficult. You know, when these things occurred years ago, there was actually people in the building that could be held accountable. You could ask questions to. I mean, right now with this building being closed, I think it demonstrates part of the problem with this process. This cloak of secrecy and closed off buildings have provided a lack of transparency and real understanding of what we're doing. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to come together and address this issue, because this is not going to go away. It is going to overshadow the entire session, and Republicans want to make that clear. Even though this building may be closed, we are still going to fight for good government.
The governor said he's open to having public hearings. Is this something you're willing to negotiate with Democrats about, or does it have to be this bipartisan 8-person committee you're talking about?
Well, certainly I would negotiate with my legislative colleagues. I don't think the executive branch should be charged with investigating themselves. And to want to conduct an investigation, I think his offices are the subject of the investigation. They shouldn't be the participants in doing the investigating.
This type of a story can often be a little inside baseballing and in the weeds. So for someone who's coming in cold at home, I mean, why should they be so outraged? Why should they care about this?
Because we've seen billions of dollars of state money that might have been steered toward certain individuals, that it's our understanding that I think on one contract they were saying it might have cost an additional $3 million. So this is, number one, government money, taxpayer dollars that have been misappropriated, number one. Number two, it's also about, and this does get to the reopening of this building. There is an erosion of good government in this building. People should be concerned with that. We already have an all-time low of confidence in government from the public, and this is another example of that. And I think we owe it to our constituents to investigate and make sure that we could stand up and say, when the day is done, that these processes work, and I can support them. And right now, I can't say that to my constituents.
Hey, the $3 million, are you talking about the Bridgeport contract?
I thought it was a different school, and I have to look which one I read, but
Because that was their decision, they went with somebody who's not the real bidder.
no, right. They had gone with that. That's correct. But I think the point being, whenever you have a no-bid process, there's naturally savings isn't necessarily on the top of the list.
Do you have any objections to the Bertram Road School in Tolland being deemed an emergency? That did waive bidding requirements, and that did fast track the reconstruction of that school. Obviously, there was something unusual about that they did have an immediate need because of the Coney Foundation. But do you think that was a mistake to use the emergency declaration for Tolland?
I think what I know of that school, obviously there were issues with the foundation and the structural integrity. So obviously we wouldn't want to put our children at risk. And there are times where emergencies are needed. That was a proposal that I supported and voted for in the General Assembly. So absolutely, I did support the notion that there was an emergency. How that bidding process went going forward, I can't comment on it. I know it is a subject of the investigation. But generally speaking, I think there are times we need to fast track, and we've recognized that.
But that did, when you voted for it, you were aware, I assume, that would waive the standard competitive bidding process.
I think we had fast tracked the funding of it so that they sort of jumped the line in the school priority process. I was not consciously aware that we were waiving bidding requirements.
You seem to agree some conclusions regarding corruption and other aspects of what you're asking this committee to investigate. Will the members you appoint to this committee come to that job if it's created with an open mind, or will they come with a set of conclusions looking for evidence to substantiate?
No, I think obviously we have to take this with an open mind, and it's easy to point to the criminality and draw your conclusion. But I am most interested in seeing all of these memorandums that have been entered into, whether it be through DAS or UConn or the Comptroller's Office, to really understand what was circumvented in this process, what was the intent of it. I recall when we were objecting to DAS being transferred to the Office of Policy and Management, the commissioner said we're doing this for efficiency purposes. Didn't work out so well. So I would like to understand the rationale for each and every one of these.
You plead crimes to the committee. You just use the word criminality again.
Well, I think obviously when you have a grand jury investigation, it's pretty safe to say that we have elements of criminal activity that's being looked into. I'm not going to be the jury on it, but it's also just looking at it at a 30,000-foot level. It's pointing to other problems that I think the legislature needs to step in on. So I'm not saying we need to act as a grand jury, but we need to come in and look at this process and make sure that government is functioning the way we intended it to.
Vin, DAS has already instituted reforms. They're rolling out more reforms in the next few days. They have auditors that are outside auditors that they've hired that are independent outside auditors. The auditors are auditing the auditors of public accounts that are bipartisan. So those three processes are already happening. You're speaking about a similar type look. You're surrounded by boards that have headlines that are pure political. There are many potential headlines you could have picked that actually showed issues. How are we to conclude that this is anything other than political?
So-
when it's one party calling for an investigation surrounded by political headlines, and those same things are already being addressed.
So we don't have any headlines other than these headlines. So right now we don't have
Mark alone has.
we don't have discussions about the memorandums of understanding. But I'm not denying the fact that there is a political overtone to this. Just as when the Rowland scandal broke out, Democrats were chomping at the bit to take down a Republican governor. With Senator DeLuca, I was newly elected and quite astonished at they were collapsing over themselves to persecute a man of 30 years of public service that had a personal interaction that implicated his public service. So yes, there's overtones of politics to all of that, and I don't deny it.
Fair point.
Tell me about the crossover. In other words, are you saying that there wouldn't be crossover between this group and the grand jury? In other words, how would you get important witnesses to come and speak to your inquiry if they were already involved in the other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not naive to think that people that are subject of a criminal investigation are not going to volunteer or are not going to volunteer through a subpoena to come and testify. So obviously there's going to be certain roadblocks that this commission is going to meet. But I would expect that government agencies would cooperate with an investigation and provide information that we need to understand this whole process. It isn't just about school construction. It is about other areas of government that have been circumvented through these memorandums that I think we need to get to the bottom to as legislators.
To what extent do you think Secretary McCaw plays?
To what extent?
Yeah, just to what extent Secretary McCaw plays a role in all this?
Well, obviously, in that MOU with DAS, she was the one assigned to oversee all of the school construction. So I think that obviously she would have a lot of information that we would be interested in hearing from.
Did the legislature make a mistake in eliminating the program review and investigations committee?
Yeah, I mean, Representative Mashinsky was pretty impassioned about keeping it. I think that in my time of serving, that program review really served as, they analyzed a lot of, prospective areas of improving legislation or, workforce development, things of that nature. And I think we all fail to appreciate the other function of that organization was to investigate these type of things. And so I think it is something that we should take a look at again to restore it. It was a bipartisan committee that would be able to handle something like this.
Can you talk about your concerns, like what you're concerned about school construction contracts, just kind of breaking down to, the state's involvement in that and how the contracts were awarded?
I think generally speaking, and I think broadly, I've just been concerned about this administration's forthcomingness on how they do business. There seems to be a lack of appreciation that this is a government agency that needs to be subject to transparency, whether it be FOI or just certain disclosure requirements and ethics requirements. With school construction in particular, as we're seeing it rolling out, there are schools that were approved. I mean, some conventionally, some unconventionally. We hear about Tolland. We saw how Norwalk School District was approved, that we had all opposed. And then we see these contracts being awarded through a bureaucratic process that the legislature really didn't have control over. That certainly raises issues of why certain schools might have been approved. I mean, the whole process from top to bottom is certainly tainted.
So should it be the local school board that, or the commission that they create to approve these projects, and that, the state involvement in that way?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen situations, anecdotally, I mean, we saw with Norwalk where that funding was all approved before the board even locally approved it. So I think the whole process, when it got transferred to OPM, it really ran awry. And so from a good government perspective, we do have to look at that and make sure it doesn't happen again, especially through the memorandum of understanding process.
So this committee should also look at legislative input to see if anybody in all four caucuses influenced, perhaps leaned on state officials to get things done. Because, I mean, that sort of happens all the time, you know? Lob rolling, deal making.
It certainly, right, and it certainly should, and I think that was always the concern when school construction was moved into OPM, which is viewed as a partisan office versus being in the Department of Administrative Services. I mean, I think just over the last 3 years, we're looking at it's over $1 billion worth of projects, and I think in 2021, and you're probably looking at over 50 projects.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Super simple. Why should taxpayers care about this?
Because it's their money that may have been wasted, misappropriated. There was a question about, for local towns and municipalities, what the state doesn't pick up comes out of local property taxes. So if I know that there was a bid where someone was paying above what they should have done, that's coming out of my taxpayer's pocket. And that's why I think every citizen who pays taxes in this state should be concerned. And as Representative Candelora said, it's not simply the school construction process. We've seen with the state pier, a project that was forecast to cost $93 million and now is in excess of $235 million. I was the sole member of the Bond Commission to vote against additional funding for this project because I was so concerned at that stage about the cost overruns. We have a quasi-public authority with a sketchy history at best, now involved with someone who oversaw school construction and then was given the state pier. Again, every single penny that may have been misspent comes out of the pockets of you and me and every constituent in this state. So that's why we should be concerned.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Any timeline on when if you get your way, this investigation going, how long, what's your wrap up?
I think it needs to function as long as it is necessary to gather all their information and to report out. I think the legislature could create that committee. I think it could either be done through the committee by vote. It's potential that it could be done through our rules, through leadership, but I would suggest that we do it through a vote of the Senate and the House. Thank you.